He was a titan of Wall Street, a man who believed the world revolved around his whims. She was his beautiful pregnant wife, the perfect accessory to his gilded life. One sweltering afternoon, he uttered 7 words that would shatter their perfect facade. Sit in the back with the groceries. He saw her as fragile an afterthought, but he never once wondered who she was before she met him. He never imagined that the quiet driver he'd hired, the one who witnessed her humiliation, would hours later look her in the eye and call her boss. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's the story of a woman he desperately underestimated. The air in the garage was thick with the scent of money, a heady mix of expensive leather Carnauba wax and the faint, clean smell of circulated climate-controlled air. It was a sterile perfection that permeated every corner of Richard Sterling's life. Outside, the July sun beat down on the manicured lawns of their Greenwich, Connecticut estate, but within the cavernous 8-car garage, it was a cool, controlled 72 degrees. Isabella Sterling stood beside the pearl-white Rolls-Royce Cullinan, a hand resting protectively on the gentle swell of her 6-month pregnancy. The baby, a boy they had already named Spencer, was a quiet child, his movements soft flutters against her ribs. She often wondered if he was sensing her own practiced stillness, the calm facade she had painstakingly constructed over 5 years of marriage. "Is everything packed, darling?" Richard's voice boomed from the doorway, echoing slightly in the large space. He wasn't looking at her, but at his reflection in the tinted window of his prized possession, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. He was a handsome man, sculpted by personal trainers and tailored by Tom Ford. His hair, the color of dark honey, was perfectly coiffed, and his eyes, a piercing shade of blue, held a perpetual glint of self-satisfaction. "Yes, Richard." "Everything is in the car," Isabella replied, her voice as smooth and placid as the surface of the infinity pool that overlooked the Long Island Sound. She had packed the bespoke picnic basket herself, ensuring the Cristal was perfectly chilled and the foie gras was from his preferred importer. A weekend in the Hamptons with his business associates demanded nothing less than perfection. Good. He finally turned his attention to her, his gaze flicking down to her belly and then back to her face. It was a fleeting, almost clinical assessment. "You're sure you're up for this?" "The drive is a couple of hours. Weather's hot." "I'm perfectly fine," she said, offering a small smile. It was the smile she had perfected, pleasant, reassuring, and utterly unreadable. She knew what he was really asking. "Will you be a burden? Will your pregnancy be an inconvenience to my weekend of schmoozing and self-aggrandizement?" He grunted, seemingly satisfied. He strode to the driver's side, the door opening with a silent, powered grace. As he slid into the plush leather seat, he gestured vaguely towards the back of the SUV. "We need to stop at Citarella on the way. I told them to have the order ready. Just a few last-minute things for the boat tomorrow." "Of course," Isabella said, moving towards the passenger door. Her hand was on the handle when his voice, sharp and dismissive, cut through the quiet hum of the garage. "No, not there." He didn't even look at her, his attention now on syncing his Patek Philippe watch with the car's dashboard clock. "The bags will take up the front seat. You sit in the back with the rest of the groceries." The words hung in the air, heavier than the humidity outside. "Sit in the back with the groceries." For a moment, Isabella felt the world tilt on its axis. The polite smile on her face didn't falter, but behind her eyes, a storm was gathering. It wasn't just the casual disrespect, the blatant declaration that she, his pregnant wife, was of less importance than a few bags of artisanal cheese and imported olives. It was the accumulation of 1,000 such slights, a mountain of tiny humiliations that had been building for years. She thought of her father, a man who would have sooner wrestled a bear than allow his wife to be treated as luggage. She thought of the woman she used to be, a woman with a spine of steel and a mind that could cut through corporate jargon like a hot knife through butter. That woman seemed like a ghost now, a faint memory from a life lived by someone else. She had met Richard at a charity gala, a whirlwind of charm and power who had swept her off her feet. He had pursued her with a relentless, all-consuming energy, showering her with gifts, flying her to Paris for dinner, promising her a world where she would never have to worry about a thing. And she, worn down by the recent sudden death of her father and the subsequent chaos of settling his vast, complicated estate, had allowed herself to be swept away. She had mistaken his possessiveness for passion, his control for security. She had willingly stepped into the gilded cage. The cage was beautiful, of course. It had walk-in closets the size of most New York apartments, filled with couture she rarely wore. It had staff who anticipated her every need before she voiced it. It had a husband who provided everything money could buy, except for the one thing she was beginning to realize she craved more than anything: respect. "Isabella, did you hear me?" Richard's voice was impatient now. "Let's go. We're on a schedule." Slowly, deliberately, she removed her hand from the passenger door handle. Her movements were fluid, graceful, betraying none of the turmoil within. She walked to the rear door of the Rolls-Royce, her back ramrod straight. She opened it herself, the heavy door swinging outward with a satisfying thud. The back was cavernous, designed to seat 3 adults in supreme comfort. A few designer shopping bags from a recent trip to Worth Avenue were pushed to one side. They looked lonely in the vast expanse of hand-stitched leather. She slid in, the scent of leather and newness enveloping her. She didn't look at Richard. She simply stared straight ahead, her gaze fixed on the back of the passenger seat, where presumably the groceries would soon sit. The throne for the cheese. Richard, oblivious, started the engine. The powerful V12 engine purred to life, a low, guttural rumble that was the sound of his dominance. As they pulled out of the garage and into the blinding sunlight, Isabella placed a hand back on her stomach. The baby kicked a sharp, sudden jab. It felt like a protest, or perhaps a promise, a silent agreement between mother and child that this was the last time. This was the final indignity. The cage, gilded as it was, had begun to rust, and she was finally ready to find the key. The stop at Citarella was as humiliating as she had anticipated. Richard remained in the car on a loud, important phone call, while 2 store employees loaded 6 paper bags into the front passenger seat and footwell. They stacked them carefully, a bounty of gourmet delights. Isabella watched from the back seat, a silent observer in her own life, feeling as significant as the cashmere throw blanket folded on the seat beside her. As they merged onto the highway, the GPS calmly dictating the route to their waterfront mansion in Southampton, Richard finally ended his call. "That was Peterson," he announced, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "The Apex deal is all but closed. Another 50 million in the bag. We'll celebrate this weekend. I'll buy you a new bauble, a necklace perhaps, something with diamonds to match your eyes." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, expecting a fawning reply. He saw only her reflection, a pale, serene face. "That's wonderful, dear," she said, her voice a perfect monotone. He frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. Her lack of effusive praise was a minor but noticeable disruption to his carefully curated world. "You seem quiet. Just thinking," she replied. "Don't think too much, darling," he said with a condescending chuckle. "That's what you have me for." Isabella didn't answer. She turned her head to look out the window, watching the blur of green trees and concrete barriers. She was thinking. Oh, she was thinking very hard. She was thinking about a private security firm in London, a firm her father had founded and quietly left to her, in a trust that Richard's army of forensic accountants had somehow miraculously missed. She was thinking about its brilliant, unassuming director, a man her father had trusted with his life, a man she had put on a retainer years ago just in case. And she was thinking about the new driver, the one Richard had hired last week. After his regular chauffeur had a family emergency, Richard had been infatuated by the man's impeccable resume and stoic professionalism sourced from the very best security placement firm, a firm Richard had no idea was a subsidiary of her own. The man was due to take over the driving duties for the weekend as soon as they arrived in the Hamptons. His name was Marcus, and he was already there waiting. The thought brought the faintest whisper of a smile to her lips, a secret she held close to her heart. Richard saw the smile in the rearview mirror and misinterpreted it. "There she is," he said, his good mood restored. "Happy wife, happy life, right?" He reached over and patted a bag of brioche as if it were a loyal pet. In the back seat, Isabella closed her eyes. The humiliation was a fire, and it was no longer just smouldering. It was beginning to rage. The Hamptons estate was Richard in architectural form, grand, imposing, and designed to broadcast wealth with all the subtlety of a foghorn. A sprawling, shingle-style cottage that stretched across 5 acres of prime oceanfront property. It featured a tennis court, a guest house larger than most family homes, and a dock that could accommodate a yacht. As the Rolls-Royce crunched up the long gravel driveway, lined with meticulously clipped hydrangeas, Isabella felt the familiar sense of being an actress stepping onto a stage. The staff were lined up at the entrance, a silent, uniformed welcoming committee. At the head of the line, standing slightly apart, was a man she had never seen before, yet knew instantly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a stillness about him that was profoundly arresting. He wore the standard driver's uniform, a simple, well-tailored black suit, white shirt, and black tie, but he wore it with an air of authority, hot servitude. His face was composed, his features strong and even, and his eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, missed nothing. This was Marcus. Richard brought the Cullinan to a smooth halt. "All right, we're here," he announced, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "Maria will show you to your room. Rest up. The Crawfords are coming for dinner at 8. He didn't wait for a reply, swinging the door open and stepping out into the warm, salt-tinged air, immediately launching into a series of instructions for the waiting staff about the wine and the boat preparations. Isabella remained in the back seat, taking a slow, calming breath. One of the housekeepers, a young woman named Sophia, opened her door with a gentle smile. "Welcome, Mrs. Sterling. Can I help you?" "Thank you, Sophia." "I'm fine," Isabella said gracefully, exiting the car. She stood for a moment, letting the sea breeze tug at the strands of her dark hair. Her eyes scanned the scene Richard, the blustering center of his own universe, the scurrying staff, and Marcus, who was now quietly overseeing the unloading of the luggage from the rear of the vehicle. He hadn't looked at her yet, his focus entirely on the task at hand. It was a perfect performance. As she walked towards the grand entrance of the house, Richard called out, "Marcus, a word." Marcus closed the luggage compartment and walked towards Richard, his stride economical and purposeful. He stood before him, hands clasped loosely behind his back, a picture of quiet deference. "You'll be handling all my driving for the weekend," Richard stated, looking Marcus up and down with the appraising eye of a man buying livestock. "I expect punctuality, discretion, and a clean vehicle at all times." "My wife?" He gestured dismissively towards Isabella, who was now ascending the stone steps. "May need to be taken for whatever it is pregnant women do. Shopping. Spa appointments. You'll be at her disposal, but my schedule takes as absolute precedence. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, Mr. Sterling," Marcus replied. His voice was a low, steady baritone devoid of any inflection. It was a voice that gave nothing away. "Good." Richard clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of patronizing ownership. "The keys to the Range Rover and the Porsche are with the house manager. You'll use the Range Rover for my wife. I don't want her condition messing up the leather on the 911. Isabella, who had paused at the top of the steps, heard every word. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the stone balustrade. "My condition." He spoke of his own child as if it were a stain, a temporary inconvenience that threatened his precious upholstery. The fire inside her burned hotter. She turned her face a mask of serene indifference, and her eyes met Marcus's for the first time. It was a fleeting connection, less than a second, but it was enough. In his gaze she saw not pity, but a flicker of something else, recognition. A silent acknowledgement of the charade. He gave a barely perceptible nod, so small that anyone else would have missed it entirely. It said, "I am here. I am ready." Isabella turned away and entered the house, the cool marble under her feet, a welcome contrast to the heat flushing her skin. The next few hours passed in a blur of forced pleasantries. She endured a light lunch with Richard's sister, a woman with a voice like shattering glass and a rapacious curiosity about Isabella's family money, which she skillfully deflected. She submitted to a prenatal massage from a therapist who cooed about her glow, a glow Isabella knew was fueled by pure, unadulterated rage. Through it all, she was a phantom in her own home, her presence acknowledged, but never truly seen. Richard was a whirlwind of activity, taking calls on the terrace, barking orders at the chef, and preparing for the arrival of the Crawfords, a couple whose primary function in life seemed to be validating Richard's success. Later, as she was getting ready for dinner, she sat at her vanity, staring at her own reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup flawless. She was wearing a flowing empire waist gown of deep emerald silk from Valentino that cost more than most people's cars. She looked the part of the pampered millionaire's wife. But her eyes told a different story. They were old-tired and held a glint of something hard and dangerous. She picked up her phone, a sleek, custom-designed device Richard had given her, and then set it down. She walked over to her jewelry box, a magnificent creation of burled walnut and velvet. She bypassed the diamond necklace Richard had promised her, the gaudy sapphires, the ostentatious rubies. Her fingers sought out a simple, elegant platinum locket, one her father had given her on her 18th birthday. It was the only piece of jewelry she owned that Richard hadn't bought. She opened it. On one side was a miniature photo of her father, his kind eyes smiling at her. On the other, a tiny, almost invisible inscription, "Vires acquirit iundo." She gains strength as she goes. She closed the locket with a soft click and fastened it around her neck. It felt cool against her skin, a talisman of her former life, a promise for her future one. Then she went to her closet, to the hidden compartment in the back, and retrieved a small, unassuming burner phone. She had one text message. It was from a number she knew by heart. The message was simple. Asset confirmed. Awaiting instructions. The asset was Marcus. The instructions were about to be given. She typed a quick reply. Phase 1 initiated. Maintain observation. Report any deviations. She deleted the message powered down the phone and put it back in its hiding place. A slow, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time that day. Richard thought he had brought her here as a decorative accessory for his weekend of power plays. He had no idea he had just delivered the Trojan horse directly into the heart of his fortress. Dinner with the Crawfords was an excruciating affair. Bill Crawford was a loud, boorish man who laughed too hard at Richard's jokes, while his wife Bitsy subjected Isabella to a relentless barrage of intrusive questions about her pregnancy, her diet, and her nursery plans. Isabella navigated the conversation with the practiced ease of a diplomat, her answers polite, vague, and utterly meaningless. Richard, lubricated by several glasses of a 2005 Chateau Margaux, was in his element. He held court at the head of the long, formal dining table, pontificating about the market, his latest acquisitions, and his unerring business acumen. The key, he slurred, slightly gesturing with his fork, is to see weakness where others see strength. You find the vulnerability, the soft underbelly, and you press. Hard. He glanced at Isabella. Isn't that right, darling? Even in a beautiful creature, there's always a weakness. Bill Crawford chuckled sycophantically. You've got a killer instinct, Rich. Always have. Isabella took a slow sip of her water, her eyes meeting Bitsy's over the rim of her glass. I think strength is often found in the most unexpected places, she said, her voice quiet but clear. Sometimes the things people dismiss as weaknesses are in fact the source of the greatest power. Richard waved a dismissive hand. Oh, here we go. The philosopher. He turned back to Bill. Anyway, about the Marina deal. He had dismissed her, as he always did. But this time something had shifted. She wasn't just absorbing the insult. She was cataloguing it, filing it away as further evidence for a case that was rapidly building. Later that evening, after the Crawfords had finally departed, Richard cornered her in the master suite. He had drunk too much, and his charm had evaporated, leaving behind a mean, petulant core. What was that at dinner? He demanded, blocking her path to the bathroom. Undermining me in front of Bill. I was merely offering a different perspective, Isabella said, calmly, refusing to be intimidated. Your perspective? He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Your perspective is what I tell you it is. Your job is to sit there, look pretty, and agree with me. That's the deal, Isabella. A deal you were more than happy to take. He gestured around the opulent room. This doesn't come for free. The locket felt heavy on her chest. She gains strength as she goes. The deal, as I recall it, was a partnership, she said, her voice dangerously low. Don't be naive. He stepped closer, his scent a cloying mix of expensive wine and self-importance. You were a damsel in distress, and I rescued you. Your father's company was in shambles after he died. You were about to lose everything. It was his favorite version of the story, the one he had told himself so many times he now believed it. But it was a lie, a carefully constructed fiction to bolster his own ego. Her father's company had been robust, its assets diverse and well-managed. The chaos had been the legal complexity of a multi-billion-dollar international estate, a complexity Richard's provincial lawyers had been ill-equipped to understand. He hadn't rescued her. He had simply capitalized on her grief and exhaustion. She looked him dead in the eye. "You are mistaken, Richard. You weren't my rescuer. You were simply the highest bidder." The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. His face, flushed with alcohol, turned a dangerous shade of red. He raised a hand, and for a terrifying second she thought he was going to hit her. But then he seemed to think better of it. He let his hand drop a sneer, twisting his lips. "You have a sharp tongue tonight. Must be the hormones." He brushed past her. "Go to bed. And in the morning, remember your place." Isabella stood frozen for a long moment. After he had gone, her heart hammering against her ribs. She took a deep, shuddering breath, then another. The fear was real, but underneath it, something else was crystallizing resolve. Cold, hard, and absolute. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He hadn't just insulted her. He had reminded her of exactly who she was. She was not a damsel. She was her father's daughter. And her father had never, ever lost a fight. She walked out onto the balcony, the cool night air a balm on her heated skin. Down below in the shadows near the garage, a lone figure stood, a small red ember glowing in the darkness. It was Marcus having a cigarette. He was looking up not at the house, but at her balcony, as if he had been waiting. She didn't wave or acknowledge him. She simply stood there, a silent queen, surveying her chessboard. The pieces were all in place. The game was about to begin. The following day dawned bright and oppressively perfect. Richard, seemingly having forgotten or chosen to ignore their confrontation, was in high spirits. The apex deal was closing. The sun was shining, and his world was exactly as it should be. He treated Isabella with a detached, magnanimous politeness, the kind a king might bestow upon a courtier who had momentarily stepped out of line. He was giving her the gift of his forgiveness, a pardon she had not asked for, and certainly did not want. "Marcus." He barked into his phone as he stood on the manicured lawn dressed in pristine white linen. "Have the Range Rover at the front in 10 minutes. My wife wants to go to the village. Get some air." He hung up without waiting for a confirmation. Isabella was sitting on the veranda, sipping a cup of decaffeinated tea, the very picture of placid domesticity. "I don't recall saying I wanted to go to the village, Richard," she said, not looking up from her book. "Nonsense. Of course you do. Get out of the house. It's not good for you or to be cooped up all day." He was already distracted, scrolling through stock market data on his tablet. The idea that she might have her own desires or plans was an alien concept. He had decided she wanted to go to the village, and so it was true. "All right," she said, closing her book with a soft snap. She would use this. Every move he made, every assumption he clung to, was a tool she could turn to her advantage. 10 minutes later, the black Range Rover was idling silently by the front steps. Marcus stood holding the rear passenger door open for her. His face was as impassive as ever, but as she approached, his eyes met hers. For a brief, significant moment, he gave a slight shake of his head, almost imperceptible. It was a warning. She paused, her hand on the door handle. "Actually," she said, turning to him, her voice clear and carrying enough for Richard to hear from the lawn. "I'm feeling a little tired. I think I'd just like a short drive along the coast, perhaps to Montauk Point. Would that be all right, Marcus?" She used his name deliberately. It was a small thing, a simple courtesy, but in the Sterling household, the staff were often referred to as you, or by their function. It was a subtle assertion of her own authority, a recognition of his humanity. Marcus's expression didn't change, but he replied, "Of course, madame, as you wish." He closed the rear door and moved to open the front passenger door for her. From across the lawn, Richard looked up, a frown creasing his brow. "What's this? I thought you were sitting in the back." The memory of the grocery incident was clearly still in his mind, a benchmark for her designated place. Isabella gifted him with one of her serene, unreadable smiles. "I feel a bit nauseous today, darling. The sea air might help if I sit up front." She didn't wait for his permission, sliding gracefully into the plush leather seat. It was a direct, albeit polite, defiance of his established order. Richard grumbled something under his breath, but was already being diverted by an incoming call, his attention immediately captured by the more pressing demands of his empire. As the Range Rover pulled away, Isabella glanced in the side mirror at his receding figure. He looked small and insignificant against the vast backdrop of the house he had built. Once they were out of the gates and on the iconic dune road with the Atlantic on one side and sprawling mansions on the other, the silence in the car was comfortable, professional. Marcus drove with a smooth, focused competence that was calming. The warning, Isabella said quietly, looking straight ahead. "What was it Mr. Sterling had a tracker placed in this vehicle this morning?" Marcus replied, his voice a low, steady murmur. "A standard GPS unit." He also requested the audio from the car's internal security system be fed to his phone. Isabella felt a chill run down her spine, despite the warmth of the sun. It wasn't surprise, but the cold confirmation of his paranoia. His need for control was so absolute that he had to track and listen to his own wife's trip to the village. "Can he hear us now?" she asked. "No, madame. The audio feed is disabled. I replaced the factory microphone with a dummy unit before we left. The GPS is active, but it will show us taking a leisurely drive to Main Street in Southampton and remaining there for 2 hours before returning, as per his expectation." Isabella turned to look at him properly for the first time. The sheer quiet capability of the man was breathtaking. He had anticipated Richard's move and neutralized it without a single instruction from her. "You work for Sterling Security Placement, correct?" she asked, playing her part in the charade. "Richard was very impressed with your credentials." "Yes, madame. They are a very thorough agency." Sterling Security Placement was, of course, the subsidiary her father's firm, London-based Aegis International, had acquired 5 years ago. It was her primary listening post in the United States, a way to keep tabs on Richard's world without him ever knowing. When Richard's driver had needed replacing, it had been laughably easy for her contact at Aegis to ensure Marcus's flawless CV, complete with glowing recommendations from fabricated sheikhs and non-existent tech billionaires, landed on the top of the pile. "My father always said, the most important quality in a man is foresight," Isabella mused, turning back to the road. "The ability to see the board not just as it is, but as it will be 3 moves from now." "A wise man, your father," Marcus said. The formal madam was starting to feel absurd. "My name is Isabella." He glanced at her, a flicker of something respect, perhaps, in his stoic eyes. "Isabella," he repeated. The name sounded different in his low baritone, solid, real. They drove on towards the lighthouse at Montauk, the landscape growing wilder and more rugged. The curated perfection of Southampton gave way to wind-swept dunes and the raw, untamed beauty of the ocean. It felt symbolic. "Tell me about the Apex deal," she said. "Mr. Sterling believes he is acquiring a controlling interest in a cutting-edge biotech firm, Marcus, reported his tone strictly informational. He sees it as undervalued due to a recent minor clinical trial setback. He has leveraged a significant portion of Sterling Industries' liquid assets and taken a substantial personal loan to finance the acquisition. He believes the deal will make him a legend, and the reality, Isabella asked, her heart beating a little faster. The reality is that Apex Biotech is a shell. The technology is vaporware based on falsified data. The setback was the first leak in a dam that is about to break. The SEC has been investigating them for 6 months. Indictments are expected within the week. When the news breaks, the stock will be worthless. The loans will be called in. It will trigger a catastrophic liquidity crisis for both Sterling Industries and for him personally. Isabella closed her eyes, absorbing the magnitude of it. It was more perfect than she could have imagined. Richard, in his arrogance, had seen a vulnerability to exploit. But the vulnerability was a trap, a Venus flytrap baited with his own greed, and he had flown right into it. And who she asked, her voice barely a whisper, was the seller, who fed him the information, the falsified data. A newly formed investment group out of Zurich, Marcus said. Registered under the name Virus Capital. Virus acquirit eundo. She gains strength as she goes. A slow, incredulous laugh escaped her lips. She had given her team at Aegis a simple directive: find a way to financially insulate her and her child from Richard, to create a firewall around a portion of her inherited assets that he couldn't touch. She had expected them to move funds, create blind trusts, the usual financial maneuvering. She had not expected them to orchestrate the complete implosion of her husband's empire. They had taken her quiet request for a shield and forged a sword. "My father would have liked you, Marcus," she said, softly. "I had the profound honor of working for him for 10 years. Ma Isabella Marcus replied. "He was the finest man I have ever known. It is my privilege to continue to serve his legacy." The truth settled between them, comfortable and absolute. Marcus wasn't just a driver. He was the head of security for Aegis International. He was her father's most trusted lieutenant. He was the guardian her father had put in place to watch over her, long before Richard had ever entered the picture. The retainer she thought she had put him on was merely a formality. His loyalty had never been for sale. When she asked, "The SEC announcement is scheduled for Monday morning, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time," he said. "Mr. Sterling has a board meeting for Sterling Industries scheduled for 10 a.m. He plans to announce his triumphant acquisition. The timing will be unfortunate for him." Isabella leaned her head back against the seat, the sea breeze washing over her through the open window. For the first time in 5 years, she felt like she could breathe. The weight of the gilded cage, the years of quiet humiliations, the suffocating pressure of being Mrs. Richard Sterling began to lift. Richard thought he was playing God, moving chess pieces around a board of his own design. He had no idea that he was just a pawn in a much larger game, a game that he had already lost. "Take me back now, Marcus," she said, her voice firm, imbued with a newfound strength. "I think I have everything I need." As they drove back toward Southampton, her mind was whirring no longer with rage, but with strategy. The board meeting on Monday. Richard's world was set to crumble, but the collapse of Sterling Industries would be messy. It would hurt thousands of innocent employees. It would tarnish her name, her son's name, by association. A simple financial ruin was not enough. It was too chaotic. She needed something cleaner, a transfer of power. She had the means. Her father's estate, which Richard believed to be a collection of dusty properties and minor stock holdings, was in fact a silent, sprawling empire of its own, with Aegis as its sword and shield. It had assets that dwarfed Richard's own fortune, even at its peak. She looked at her phone, the one Richard had given her. A notification popped up. It was a news alert from a financial journal. Billionaire Richard Sterling on the verge of landmark Apex biotech acquisition. A masterstroke of timing and insight. She smiled. The media was already writing his legend. They had no idea they should be writing his obituary. When they returned to the estate, Richard was pacing the terrace like a caged lion, his face a thunderous mask. The moment Isabella stepped out of the Range Rover, he was on her. "Where the hell have you been?" he snarled, grabbing her arm. His grip was painfully tight. "I told you to go to the village. The tracker showed you sitting on some side street for 2 hours. Were you meeting someone? Are you cheating on me?" The accusation was so ludicrous, so steeped in his own narcissistic paranoia, that Isabella almost laughed. He couldn't conceive of a world where she wasn't either his possession or someone else's. The idea that she might have a mind, a will of her own, was utterly beyond his comprehension. Behind Richard, Marcus had exited the car and was standing in his usual at-ease posture, but Isabella noticed a subtle shift in his stance. His weight had moved to the balls of his feet. He was ready to intervene in a fraction of a second. She met Richard's furious gaze with a cold calm that seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. "Let go of my arm, Richard," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Not until you tell me what you've been doing." I was feeling unwell. I asked Marcus to pull over so I could rest. My condition, as you so delicately put it, can be unpredictable. She infused the words with a saccharine sweetness that was pure acid underneath. Surely you wouldn't begrudge your pregnant wife a moment's peace. He was momentarily thrown the perfect social excuse of her pregnancy, a shield he couldn't easily break through. He released her arm, leaving red marks on her skin. "Fine," he snapped. "Fine. Just stay where I can see you. I have enough on my mind with this deal, without you playing games." He turned and stormed back into the house, his phone already pressed to his ear. Isabella watched him go, a profound sense of pity mixing with her contempt. He was a bull charging at a red cape, completely oblivious to the matador, standing calmly to one side, sword in hand. She turned to Marcus, her expression hardening. "The timeline has to change," she said in a low voice. "Monday is too late. He's becoming erratic. The collapse of Apex needs to happen, but I want control of Sterling Industries before the news breaks. I want to salvage the company, not let it burn with him." Marcus's face remained impassive, but his eyes were sharp, analytical. "That would be difficult. The deal isn't set to be signed until Sunday night." "Then we make it happen sooner," she stated. "Richard is arrogant, but he's also impatient. He wants the glory of this acquisition now. He's been boasting about it all weekend. We can use that. We can make him think the sellers are getting cold feet, that another buyer is circling. Force his hand." "It's risky," Marcus said. "It accelerates the entire plan." "Good," Isabella replied, rubbing the marks on her arm. "I'm done waiting." She walked into the house, a woman on a mission. The next few hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. She retrieved her burner phone and, in coordination with her team at Aegis, began to orchestrate the final act. An anonymous leak was planted with a notoriously gossipy financial blogger, hinting that a rival firm led by an old adversary of Richard's was preparing a surprise all-cash offer for Apex Biotech. The post, designed to look like a piece of unsubstantiated but tantalizing rumor, was sent directly to Richard via a concerned friend, a shell identity managed by Aegis. The bait was taken almost instantly. Isabella, sitting in the library and pretending to read, heard Richard bellowing in his office. He was a symphony of fury and panic. He burst out a few minutes later, his face pale, his eyes wild. "They're trying to screw me," Isabella Peterson just called. "The sellers are getting nervous. They're talking about delaying the signing." He was pacing, running a hand through his usually perfect hair, disheveling it. "That snake McGregor is trying to steal this from under me." Isabella looked up, feigning concern. "Oh, Richard, that's terrible. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to close it. I'm going to close it tonight," he declared. "I'm not letting them weasel out of this. I'll wire the money right now. Force their hand. Show them I'm not a man to be trifled with." It was exactly what she had hoped for. His pride would not allow him to be seen as weak or hesitant. He would rush headlong into the trap to prove his dominance. "I'll need to go to my office in the city," he said, his mind racing. "I need the secure servers. The main terminal. I can't risk a transfer this big on the Hamptons Wi-Fi." He was already shouting for Marcus. "Marcus, get the chopper ready." Now Isabella stood up. "I'll come with you, darling," she said sweetly. "I can be your good luck charm." Richard looked at her, a flicker of his old possessiveness returning. "Good. Yes. You should be there. You should see this." He wanted an audience for his triumph. As they walked towards the helipad on the far side of the estate, Isabella allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. He thought he was taking her to witness his coronation. In reality, she was escorting him to his execution. The flight to Manhattan was tense. Richard was on his satellite phone the entire time, barking at lawyers, bankers, and the beleaguered Mr. Peterson, who was in fact a senior Aegis operative playing the role of a lifetime. Isabella simply looked out the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The city lights glittered below them like a carpet of scattered diamonds. It was the city where she had met him, the city where she had lost herself, and it was the city where she would finally reclaim her life. They landed on the rooftop helipad of the Sterling Industries building, a sleek glass and steel monolith in the heart of the financial district. The building was deserted, the Saturday night skeleton crew a world away on the lower floors. Richard strode through the empty, silent office, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He was a king returning to his castle. His personal office was an exercise in ego. It was a corner suite with panoramic views of the city, dominated by a massive mahogany desk. A large, abstract painting, all angry slashes of red and black, hung on one wall. It was a perfect reflection of its owner. "Watch and learn," he said to Isabella, throwing his jacket onto a leather sofa. He sat at his desk, his fingers flying across the keyboard of his high-security terminal. He was initiating the largest wire transfer of his life, a 9-figure sum that represented the culmination of his life's work. Isabella didn't sit. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, her back to him, and looked down at the city below. She pulled out her own phone, the one Richard had given her, and sent a single pre-written text message to Marcus, who was waiting downstairs in the lobby. The message said, "Execute." On Richard's screen, the wire transfer confirmation flashed. Successful. A broad, triumphant grin spread across his face. He had done it. He had beaten them all. Done, he announced, leaning back in his chair, the very picture of a conquering hero. Apex is mine. On Monday morning, the world will know that Richard Sterling does not lose. I'm afraid the world will be learning a very different lesson. Richard, a new voice said. Richard swiveled his chair around. Standing in the doorway were two men in dark suits. Behind them stood Marcus, his face calm and unreadable. "Who the hell are you?" Richard demanded, jumping to his feet. "This is a private office?" One of the men stepped forward. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Michael Donovan from the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is my colleague Agent Shaw from the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and market manipulation in connection with your acquisition of Apex Biotech." Richard's face went slack, the color draining from it. "What? That's impossible. The deal is clean." "The deal," the second agent said, stepping forward and placing a set of handcuffs on the mahogany desk, "was a sting operation. Apex Biotech has been under federal investigation for months. Your seller, Mr. Peterson, has been a cooperating witness. Every call, every email has been recorded." Richard stared at them, his mind refusing to process the information. He looked from the agents to Marcus, a flicker of comprehension dawning in his eyes. You knew about this," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at him. "My driver." Marcus said nothing. He simply looked past Richard, his gaze settling on Isabella. Richard followed his gaze. He turned slowly, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror, to look at his wife. She was still standing by the window, but she had turned to face him. The serene, submissive mask was gone. In its place was a woman he had never seen before, her expression one of cool, absolute command. "Isabella." He whispered the name, a question, an accusation, a plea. She didn't answer him. Her eyes were on Marcus. "Is it done?" she asked, her voice ringing with authority in the silent office. Marcus stepped forward past the stunned federal agents. He stopped a respectful distance from her, and in the cavernous office of the man who had ordered his pregnant wife to sit in the back with the groceries. The driver looked at her, dipped his head in a gesture of profound respect, and said the word that shattered Richard Sterling's world. "Forever." "Yes, boss. The board has been notified. The emergency vote was unanimous. As of 5 minutes ago, you have controlling interest and have been appointed chairwoman of Sterling Industries." The silence that followed Marcus's declaration was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air and arrogance out of the room. The federal agents looked on their professional stoicism, warring with undisguised shock. Boss Richard croaked the word foreign and nonsensical on his tongue. He looked from Isabella's calm face to Marcus's steady presence and back again. "What is this? What have you done?" Isabella moved away from the window, her steps slow and deliberate as she approached the massive mahogany desk, his throne. She ran a hand over the polished wood, her touch both a caress and a claim. "I have done what you were too arrogant to do yourself, Richard. I have saved this company." She turned her gaze to him, and for the first time he truly saw her. He saw the intelligence he'd dismissed, the strength he'd mistaken for fragility, and the cold fury he never imagined existed. "Your vanity project, the Apex deal, was a suicide note," she said, her voice like ice. "The company is a phantom. In 36 hours, Sterling Industries would have been worthless, all because of your insatiable ego. I couldn't let this company and its thousands of employees go down with you." How he stammered his mind, refusing to connect the dots. You don't have the power. A humorless smile touched her lips. This is the part you'll never understand. You saw me as a girl you rescued. You never bothered to look into my family. My father, the man you dismissed, founded one of the most powerful private equity firms in the world. He left it to me, Richard. All of it. She let the truth land, watching his face crumble. While you were congratulating yourself in the sky, my team purchased the debt you took on for this deal. We made an offer to the other shareholders, showing them the proof of the fraud you'd fallen for and your impending arrest. Faced with ruin or a new, incredibly wealthy chairwoman, they made a very logical choice. Agent Donovan cleared his throat, stepping forward with the handcuffs. Richard Sterling, you are under arrest, as the agent recited the Miranda rights. Richard's vacant gaze remained fixed on Isabella. He had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and utterly destroyed by the woman he considered an object. Isabella turned away the sight of his complete collapse, bringing her no joy. Only a profound, weary sadness for the years she had lost. She walked over to Marcus. "The company jet," she said, her voice firm, already shifting to the immense task ahead. "Ready in an hour. We're flying to London." "Yes, boss," Marcus replied, the title now a simple statement of fact. As the agents led a handcuffed, shell-shocked Richard to the elevator, he looked back one last time. "Isabella," he pleaded. She met his gaze, her expression no longer angry, but filled with a quiet finality. "Goodbye, Richard." She did not watch the elevator doors close on her past. In the weeks that followed, Isabella remade Sterling Industries in her own image one of integrity and strength. The gaudy symbols of Richard's reign were liquidated, the capital reinvested in the company's true asset, its people. She led not with bluster, but with the quiet, decisive authority of a woman who had been tested by fire and emerged unbreakable. Marcus remained by her side, her most trusted advisor, and a link to the father whose legacy she was now honoring. 3 months later, Isabella gave birth to a healthy boy. She did not name him Spencer. She named him Arthur, after her father. Holding her son, looking into his tiny, trusting face, Isabella felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. She had been told to sit in the back seat, but she had taken the wheel. She was finally driving towards a horizon of her own making, free and in control with her son, safely beside her, for the journey ahead. This wasn't just a story about a woman scorned. It was about the silent power that lies dormant in those who are consistently underestimated. Isabella's journey from a submissive wife to a commanding business leader reminds us that true strength isn't about shouting the loudest, but about strategic patience and knowing the perfect moment to make your move. She didn't just escape her gilded cage. She dismantled it and used the materials to build an Errol founded on respect. Her story is a testament to the fact that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. If her incredible story of resilience and empowerment moved you, please give this video a thumbs up to help us share it with more people. Don't forget to hit that share button to inspire your friends and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable real-life stories. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. What does it feel like to be on top of the world? To have the perfect marriage, a loving millionaire husband, and your first child just days away from being in your arms? For Breonna Hayes, it felt like sunshine, until a single manila envelope arrived at her own baby shower. Inside wasn't a congratulations card. It was a stack of legal documents, cold and sterile, with 2 words circled in her husband's handwriting, "Sign here." This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's a story of devastating betrayal, a web of lies that runs deeper than anyone could imagine, and the terrifying strength a mother finds when she has nothing left to lose. The California sun, a buttery yellow, spilled into the sprawling living room of the Pacific Palisades mansion. It was a day curated for perfection, much like Breonna Hayes' life itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a turquoise infinity pool that seemed to melt into the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Inside the decor was a symphony of cream gold and a gentle powder blue, the theme for the baby shower. Her baby shower. At 32, Breonna was living a life most people only saw in magazines. She radiated a serene glow, her hands instinctively cradling the taut swell of her stomach, where their son, kicked with impatient energy. She was 38 weeks along a vessel of life and love, and today was the celebration of that miracle. Her husband, Harrison Cole, was the architect of this gilded world. A tech mogul who had shot to fame with his company, Innovatech Solutions. He was sharp, devastatingly handsome, and possessed a charisma that could bend rooms to his will. He'd just turned 40, and was at the peak of his power. This baby, he'd told her, was the final piece. The legacy. As her friends, the wives of other tech giants and venture capitalists, laughed and opened gifts, a tiny cashmere sweater from Burberry, a silver rattle from Tiffany's Breonna, scanned the room for him. Harrison had promised to be there. He'd been distant lately, consumed by a new project he called Project Chimera, but he had sworn he wouldn't miss this. "He's probably just on a call, honey," her best friend Chloe whispered, squeezing her hand. Chloe, a razor-sharp family law attorney, had a sixth sense for trouble, but even she seemed lulled by the day's perfection. Just then the polished glass front door opened. It wasn't Harrison. It was a courier holding a slim, stiff manila envelope. He looked uncomfortable, a stark contrast to the opulence around him. "Delivery for Mrs. Breonna Cole," he said, his voice flat. Breonna frowned. "I wasn't expecting anything." She took the envelope, her name typed in a cold, impersonal font. It felt strangely heavy. She excused herself, moving toward the quiet solitude of Harrison's home office, a room of dark mahogany and smoked glass that always smelled faintly of his expensive cologne. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tore the seal. Inside wasn't a document from Innovatech. It wasn't a contract or a deed. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage. The words swam before her eyes, blurring into an incoherent mess of legal jargon. Her breath hitched. This had to be a mistake, a cruel, elaborate prank. She scrolled down the page, her heart hammering against her ribs. Petitioner Harrison Cole. Respondent Breonna Hayes. Grounds for divorce, irreconcilable differences. Her world tilted on its axis. Irreconcilable differences. They had just finalized the nursery. They had picked a name, Leo. Last week, he had kissed her stomach and told the baby he couldn't wait to teach him how to sail. Tucked behind the petition was a single folded sheet of Harrison's personal stationery. There was no letter, no explanation, no apology. Just a note scrawled in his familiar, decisive handwriting, the same handwriting that signed multi-million-dollar deals. Breonna, my attorneys have enclosed a settlement offer. It is more than generous. I suggest you accept it. Do not contest this. Sign here. An arrow pointed to a signature line on the settlement agreement, and beneath it, a final gut-wrenching sentence. I have moved on. I expect you to do the same." A wave of nausea and dizziness washed over her. She gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles white. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Harrison. She fumbled to open it, praying for an explanation for him to say it was all a terrible error. The message contained only a single sentence. It wasn't for her. It was a screenshot of a flight confirmation. 2 first-class tickets to Bora Bora, departing from LAX in 3 hours. The passengers listed were Harrison Cole and Isabella Rossi. Isabella Rossi, a name that struck Breonna like a physical blow. Isabella was a junior marketing executive at Innovatech. She was 26 with raven hair, ambitious eyes, and a predatory grace. Breonna had met her at a company gala a few months ago and had felt a prickle of unease, a feeling she had dismissed as hormonal paranoia. Now that paranoia curdled into a horrifying certainty. From the living room, she could hear the sound of her friends laughing, the rustle of wrapping paper, the celebration of a life that had just been declared dead. She stood in the cold, silent office, holding the death certificate of her marriage, the ashes of her perfect life coating her tongue. Her water hadn't broken, but she felt a different kind of rupture, a deep internal tearing that was far more painful. The baby kicked a frantic, desperate rhythm as if he knew, as if he could feel his mother's world and his own imploding before he had even taken his first breath. The laughter from the baby shower became a muffled, mocking echo as Breonna sank into Harrison's leather chair. The scent of his cologne, once a comfort, now felt like poison gas suffocating her. She stared at the divorce papers, the words no longer blurry, but etched into her brain with brutal clarity. Generous. The word was a slap in the face. The settlement offered her a one-time payment of $5 million and the downtown condo they kept for occasional city nights. In return, she was to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and waive any and all future claims to Harrison's fortune, his company, and any assets acquired during their 5-year marriage. His net worth was estimated to be north of $500 million. It wasn't generosity. It was an insult. It was hush money. Chloe found her minutes later, her cheerful expression dissolving into one of horror as she saw the documents spread across the desk. "Oh my God, Ames," she breathed, rushing to her side. Chloe's legal mind immediately took over her eyes, scanning the pages with a professional fury. "This is a predator's contract. He had this drafted by William Sterling. Sterling is a shark, the kind of lawyer you hire to crush someone, not to amicably separate." Breonna could only shake her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "He's in Bora Bora, Chloe, with Isabella Rossi." The name hung in the air. Chloe's face hardened. "That viper. I saw the way she looked at him at the Christmas party." She knelt in front of Breonna, taking her hands. "Okay, listen to me. You are not signing anything. Do you hear me? Not a single thing. We are going to fight this." But the fight felt galaxies away. The first battle was simply surviving the next hour. The baby shower had to be ended, with a composure she didn't know she possessed. Breonna walked back into the living room, a brittle smile plastered on her face. She thanked everyone for coming, blaming a sudden onset of fatigue, a common ailment in the final weeks of pregnancy. Her friends, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, but oblivious to its cataclysmic cause, packed up the gifts and left with sympathetic smiles and well-wishes for the birth. As the last car pulled away, the silence in the sprawling mansion was absolute and terrifying. The meticulously arranged presents, the half-eaten cake, the blue balloons bobbing gently against the ceiling, they were all artifacts from a life that no longer existed. Harrison returned 3 days later, tanned and utterly unapologetic. He walked into the house as if he were a visitor, his eyes cool and distant. Isabella was not with him, but her victory clung to him like a cheap perfume. "Did you get the papers?" he asked, not as a husband, but as a CEO, confirming receipt of a memo. Briona stood in the foyer, her hands on her belly, a silent guardian of the son he had so easily discarded. "How could you, Harrison, at my baby shower?" "Our son is due any day." He had the audacity to look annoyed. "I wanted it to be clean, Briona. A swift, decisive action. Dragging it out would be more painful. I'm being efficient." Efficient? The word was so cold, so transactional it stole her breath. "We are not a business deal. You're dissolving Harrison. This is our life, our family. The life we had is over," he said, his voice flat. "Isabella and I are in love. I'm starting a new life. I thought you of all people would understand the need for a strategic pivot." The corporate jargon was a shield protecting him from the messy human carnage he was creating. He was optimizing his life, divesting himself of an asset, his pregnant wife, that no longer served his portfolio of happiness. "You need to be out by the end of the week." He continued, glancing at his Patek Philippe watch. "The condo is ready. I've had your essential things moved there. The rest can go into storage." "My things," she whispered, looking around the house. She had designed every piece of furniture, every shade of paint, every piece of art, chosen with love and care. "This is my home." "It's my house, Briona." He corrected her, the cruelty in his voice now undisguised. "It is an asset listed under the Innovatech Holding Company. Just like the cars. And the jet." The truth of her situation crashed down on her. She hadn't just been a wife. She had been a resident manager in a gilded cage, and her lease was up. The next few days were a blur of humiliation and heartache. Movers hired by Harrison's assistant came and packed her life into boxes, their polite sympathy more agonizing than open pity. She packed a bag for the hospital herself, her hands shaking as she folded tiny onesies and receiving blankets. She dismantled the nursery piece by piece, taking the crib, the changing table, and the rocking chair they had assembled together just a month before. That was the moment she finally broke sobbing over a piece of unfinished wood, the ghost of his laughter echoing in her ears. She moved into the sterile, impersonal condo in Century City. It was luxurious, with stunning views of the city lights, but it was cold and empty, a high-tech prison. There were no memories here, no echoes of love. Just the hum of the climate control and the oppressive weight of her new reality. She was alone, 38.5 weeks pregnant, and about to face the biggest challenge of her life, while the man who had promised to be by her side was building a new life on the ruins of hers. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed, she felt the first sharp twinge of a contraction. It was not time, not yet. It was just her body and her baby reacting to the immense stress. But it was a warning. The clock was ticking. The first meeting in Chloe's downtown LA office was like stepping out of a fog and into a war room. The space was sleek, modern, and intimidating, lined with legal books that seemed to stand as soldiers at attention. Chloe in her element was no longer just a comforting friend. She was a commander, a strategist, her mind already mapping out the battlefield. "Okay," Chloe said, sliding a bottle of water towards Briona. "First things first. His offer is garbage, and we're treating it as such. We're rejecting it outright. William Sterling expects you to be a weeping, hysterical mess who will take the money and run. We are not going to give him that satisfaction." Briona nodded, a flicker of strength igniting within her. "He called me an asset he was divesting. He wants efficiency. Let's show him what inefficiency looks like." "That's my girl." Chloe grinned, a fierce, protective light in her eyes. "Now, under California law, this is a community property state. That means anything earned or acquired during the marriage is considered 50-50. His claim that the house and other assets are under a corporate holding doesn't just make it his. We're going to argue that you, as his wife and partner, contributed to that success. You hosted the dinners, you charmed the investors, you created the stable home environment that allowed him to build his empire. Your contribution was non-monetary, but it has immense value." Chloe began to type furiously, a plan forming in real time. "We are filing a counter-petition immediately. We will demand a temporary restraining order to freeze all major assets. He won't be able to move money, sell stock, or transfer property without a court order. That will get his attention." She continued. "Next, we demand a forensic accounting of all his assets, personal and corporate. Harrison is smart. He's probably been planning this for months, moving money around, setting up shell corporations trying to hide his true worth. We need to find every single dollar." The process was grueling. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal documents, financial statements, and long, draining meetings. Briona, her body heavy and weary, waddled into depositions and mediations, forcing herself to remain calm and composed, as Harrison's lawyer, William Sterling, tried to paint her as a gold-digging trophy wife. Harrison attended only when legally compelled, his presence sucking the air from the room. He refused to look at Briona, directing all his comments to Sterling. He portrayed their marriage as a simple arrangement, where he provided a lifestyle, and she existed. He claimed her interior design career had been a mere hobby he had funded. "Mrs. Cole has not worked a day in our marriage," Sterling argued, in one meeting his voice dripping with condescension. "She has lived a life of extreme privilege, funded entirely by Mr. Cole's genius and hard work." "I was his partner," Briona stated, her voice shaking but firm. "I managed our homes. I organized the events that secured him millions in venture capital. I gave up my own burgeoning design firm to support his vision. A vision that has paid for your couture wardrobe and your Escalade, I presume?" Sterling sneered. It was a low blow designed to rattle her, but Chloe was ready. "A vision, Mr. Sterling," Chloe cut in, her voice like ice, "that was built on the foundation of a stable marriage my client, Cole, provided. A marriage Mr. Cole has chosen to detonate with a 26-year-old subordinate days before his wife is due to give birth to his first and only child. Let's not pretend this is about anything other than your client's sordid affair and his attempt to financially punish the woman who is carrying his heir." The shot hit its mark. Sterling stiffened, and even Harrison flinched. Meanwhile, Isabella Rossi was not staying in the shadows. She was a ghost haunting Briona's every waking moment. Her Instagram account, once private, was now public. There were pictures of her and Harrison on a yacht in Marina del Rey, clinking champagne glasses. A picture of her wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that Briona recognized as one she had admired weeks ago. The most painful post was a picture of Isabella's hand, now adorned with a massive canary diamond ring resting on the steering wheel of Harrison's Aston Martin. The caption read, "The future is bright." She had effectively moved into Briona's life before the bed was even cold. Friends, or people Briona had thought were friends, sent her screenshots, their messages dripping with pity. "Have you seen this?" I'm so sorry, Brionna. Each message was another twist of the knife. Chloe hired a forensic accountant, a gruff, no-nonsense man named Robert Fisher, who began to dig. His initial findings were troubling. "He's good," Robert told them over a conference call. "There are layers of LLCs and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. It's a maze. He's been siphoning money from Innovatech into these accounts for at least a year, probably under the guise of R&D or acquisitions. He was planning his exit strategy long before he told you." The premeditation was what hurt the most. This wasn't a sudden infatuation. It was a calculated long-term plan. While she was picking out cribs, he was consulting with lawyers and accountants, dismantling their life in secret. As her due date loomed, the pressure mounted. The stress was causing Braxton Hicks' contractions to become more frequent and intense. Her doctor warned her to rest to avoid any undue anxiety. It was an impossible request. Her entire world was a source of anxiety. One evening, as she sat alone in the condo, sorting through the baby clothes, she'd managed to salvage a wave of despair washed over her. She was facing the fight of her life for her future and her sons against a man she once loved, a man who now saw her as nothing more than a line item on a balance sheet. He had the money, the power, and a team of ruthless lawyers. All she had was Chloe, a mountain of evidence to uncover, and the tiny, innocent life kicking inside her. It didn't feel like a fair fight. But as she folded a tiny pair of blue socks, her resolve hardened into steel. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Leo. And for him, she would become a warrior. The first real contraction hit her at 2 a.m. It was a searing, all-encompassing pain that ripped her from a restless sleep. She gasped, clutching her belly as her entire body tensed. This was it. There was no mistaking the raw power of it. For a frantic moment, pure panic seized her. She was alone. The person who was supposed to be holding her hand, timing her contractions and telling her to breathe, was thousands of miles away psychologically, if not physically. Her hands shaking, she called Chloe, her voice a strained whisper. "It's time." "I'm on my way," Chloe said, her voice instantly alert, all business and no panic. "Did you call your doctor?" "Yes," she said to come in. "Okay, breathe, Brionna. Just breathe. I'll be there in 20 minutes. We can do this." "We." The word was a lifeline. Chloe arrived, a whirlwind of efficiency, grabbing the hospital bag, helping Brionna down to the car. Her calm presence, a stark contrast to Brionna's rising terror. The drive to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center was a blur of traffic lights and escalating waves of pain. In the sterile triage room, a nurse asked the routine questions. "Is the father on his way?" The question felt like a physical blow. "No," Brionna managed to say, her voice tight. He won't be here." The nurse's sympathetic glance was almost unbearable. Chloe stepped in. "I'm her birth partner." The hours that followed were a grueling marathon of pain exhaustion and fierce determination. Chloe was a rock, holding her hand, wiping her brow, advocating for her with the doctors and nurses. Through the haze of agony, Brionna focused on one thing: the image of her son's face. This beautiful, innocent child deserved to be brought into the world with love, not surrounded by the ghosts of betrayal. At 11:30 a.m., after 14 hours of labor, she gave one final primal push. The world exploded into the sound of a tiny, furious cry. "He's here, Brionna. He's here!" Chloe sobbed, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. The doctor placed the warm, wailing baby on her chest. He was perfect. A mess of dark hair, scrunched up features, and tiny flailing fists. Briona looked into his eyes, and the entire world with all its pain and chaos melted away. There was only him. "Hello, Leo," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm your mummy. I love you so much." It was in this sacred, peaceful moment that the door to the delivery room opened. Harrison stood there, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, looking more like he was arriving for a board meeting than the birth of his child. His hair was perfect. His face was a mask of detached curiosity. Standing just behind him in the hallway, Briona caught a glimpse of Isabella, who quickly ducked out of sight. She had driven him here. The thought was so vile, it made Briona's stomach churn. "So," Harrison said, his voice void of any warmth. "That's him." Chloe stepped forward, her body a physical barrier between him and the bed. "You have a hell of a nerve showing up now." "He's my son. I have a right to be here," Harrison stated, his eyes flicking to the baby, then to the chart at the foot of the bed. "What's his name?" "Leo Michael Hayes." Briona said, her voice quiet but unyielding. Michael was her father's name. Hayes was her name. Harrison's jaw tightened. "His last name is Cole. He is a Cole. You forfeited the right to make those decisions when you served me divorce papers at my baby shower." Briona shot back, a protective fire surging through her. "His legal name is Hayes. When he is old enough, he can decide for himself if he wants the name of the man who abandoned him before he was even born." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. The nurses looked on, deeply uncomfortable. Harrison's demeanor shifted from cold to menacing. He took a step forward, ignoring Chloe. "Don't be foolish, Briona. This will have legal ramifications. You are making this unnecessarily difficult." "Get out," she said, her voice low and trembling with rage. "I am not leaving until we've discussed the birth certificate. I said get out." Her voice cracked, a raw, primal scream that came from the depths of her soul. "You are not welcome here. This moment is for me and my son. You gave up your place here. Now leave." For the first time, a flicker of something shock, maybe even a sliver of shame, crossed Harrison's face. He looked at the tiny baby in Briona's arms, then at her face ravaged by childbirth and fury. Without another word, he turned and walked out, the expensive click of his shoes echoing down the hallway. The aftermath of his visit was devastating. The brief, beautiful peace of Leo's birth had been shattered. But as Briona held her son close, she realized something profound. Harrison's betrayal had been revealed in yet another layer. It wasn't just that he had left her for another woman. It was that he was incapable of genuine love and connection. He saw his own son not as a miracle to be cherished, but as an asset, a legacy to be branded with his name. His visit wasn't about meeting his child. It was a power play, an attempt to assert control. Later that day, a hospital social worker came to her room. "Mrs. Cole," she began hesitantly, "your husband's attorney, a Mr. Sterling, has been in contact with hospital administration. He is asserting Mr. Cole's paternal rights and is contesting the last name on the birth registration forms." The audacity was breathtaking. He hadn't held his son. He hadn't asked if she was okay. But he had already sicked his lawyer on her. "Tell Mr. Sterling," Briona said, her voice dangerously calm as she rocked her sleeping son, "that he and his client have just started a war they are not prepared to win." She was no longer just a wronged wife. She was a mother, a lioness protecting her cub, and Harrison Cole was about to find out just how sharp her claws could be. The weeks following Leo's birth were a surreal blend of tender, sleepless nights and aggressive legal skirmishes. The fight over Leo's last name became the first major battleground. Harrison pushed by Isabella, and his own ego was trying to legally force the name Cole, framing Breonna as vindictive and unstable. It was Chloe who unearthed the strategy that would turn the tide. He's trying to establish a clear paternal link for inheritance and legacy purposes, Chloe explained during a late-night call as Breonna nursed Leo. It's not about love. It's about control of the Cole brand. But we can use his own actions against him. In court, Chloe presented a timeline that was damning. She showed the date the divorce papers were served, the flight itinerary to Bora Bora, the social media posts from Isabella and Harrison's 3-minute appearance at the hospital. Mr. Cole's interest in his son, Chloe argued to the judge, only seems to manifest when it concerns legal branding. He was not present for the birth. He has made no effort to see the child, since yet he has expended considerable legal resources to control the child's name. This is not the behavior of a loving father. It is the behavior of a corporate executive managing an asset. The judge, a stern but fair woman in her 60s, agreed. She ruled that the child would be known as Leo Michael Hayes, with the option to add Cole later if all parties consented when the child was older. It was the first real victory, and it felt monumental. But the larger war over the financial settlement raged on. Robert Fisher, the forensic accountant, was hitting brick wall after brick wall. The offshore accounts were masterfully hidden behind shell corporations with names like Chimera Holdings and Aegean Ventures. This Project Chimera he was talking about, Breonna mused one afternoon, bouncing Leo on her lap. It wasn't a project at Innovatech. It was his project to leave me. The thought sparked an idea. Chloe, can we get access to his corporate communications emails server logs? It's a long shot, Chloe admitted. We'd have to prove a direct link between corporate funds being used for personal gain to convince a judge to pierce the corporate veil. But it's not impossible. The break came from an unexpected source. David Chen Harrison's co-founder and chief technology officer at Innovatech reached out to Chloe. David had known Breonna since before she and Harrison were married. He was a quiet, brilliant man who had always treated her with kindness and respect. I can't sit by and watch this happen, David said, his voice tense over a secure line. What Harrison is doing to Breonna is one thing, but he's also putting the company at risk. I think he's being played. They met secretly at a coffee shop far from their usual haunts. David looked exhausted. Harrison has given Isabella Rossi an incredible amount of access, he explained. She's no longer in marketing. He's created a new position for her Chief Strategy Officer. It's a sham title, but it gives her access to everything our proprietary code, our Q4 projections, our client lists. He slid a flash drive across the table. I've been running my own security diagnostics. There have been massive data transfers from our servers late at night, routed through an encrypted proxy to an external IP address. The transfers started about 6 months ago. The user who authorized them, Isabella Rossi. Chloe's eyes widened. Where is the data going? I'm still tracing it, David said. But my gut tells me it's going to a competitor, specifically a rival company called Nexus Dynamics. They've been a thorn in our side for years. In the last few months, they've miraculously anticipated our every move, launching competing products just weeks before ours. The pieces began to click into place with terrifying speed. Isabella wasn't just a home wrecker. She was a corporate spy. She didn't just want Harrison's money, Briona whispered, horrified. She wants to destroy his company. And she's using him to do it, Chloe added. She manufactured this perfect romance, isolated him from his real friends and partners, and convinced him she was the only one who truly understood his genius. He's so arrogant, he couldn't see he was being manipulated. With David's information, Chloe had the ammunition she needed. She filed an emergency motion not in family court, but in business court, presenting evidence of potential corporate espionage and malfeasance that threatened the value of Innovatech Solutions, a primary asset in the divorce proceedings. The motion requested a court-appointed receiver to take temporary control of the company to prevent further damage and asset stripping. This was no longer a messy divorce. It was a corporate thriller. Isabella wasn't just a mistress. She was a highly sophisticated operative. She hadn't stumbled into a relationship with a rich man. She had targeted him. Her affair with Harrison was just the method of entry, the key card to get inside the vault. Her goal was the entire kingdom, not just half of the king's treasure. The night before the hearing, Briona looked at the evidence they had compiled: server logs, financial transfers, David's sworn affidavit. It was a portrait of a breathtakingly audacious betrayal. Isabella hadn't just stolen her husband. She had turned him into a weapon to destroy his own life's work. And Harrison, blinded by his ego and infatuation, had handed her the gun and pointed it at his own head. The next day in court, they wouldn't just be fighting for a fair settlement. They would be exposing a conspiracy that would bring Harrison Cole's entire empire crashing down. The courtroom was a sterile, cold environment, a world away from the warm, sunlit home Briona once shared with Harrison. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a general on the verge of a decisive victory. Harrison and William Sterling sat at the opposing table, looking supremely confident. They clearly believed this was just another legal maneuver, a desperate attempt by Briona to gain leverage. They had no idea about the corporate bomb that was about to detonate. The judge, a sharp-eyed man named Judge Alistair Finch, reviewed the emergency motion with a deep frown. "Ms. Davies," he said to Chloe, "these are extraordinarily serious allegations. You are alleging active corporate espionage that directly impacts the marital assets in question. We are your honor," Chloe replied, her voice ringing with confidence. "And we have proof." For the next hour, Chloe laid out the case with chilling precision. She presented David Chen's affidavit. She showed the logs of the data transfers, time-stamped and authenticated. She cross-referenced them with Isabella Rossi's security badge swipes, showing she was in the building at Harrison's executive terminal at the exact times of the largest data breaches. Then came the financial evidence. Robert Fisher, the forensic accountant, took the stand and explained how he had traced the labyrinth of shell corporations. He demonstrated how Innovatech funds had been funneled into Chimera Holdings, and from there used to purchase lavish gifts for Isabella the Canary diamond ring, a down payment on a Beverly Hills condo, all disguised as consulting fees. But the masterstroke was the final piece of evidence David Chen had uncovered just the night before. He had finally cracked the destination IP address of the data transfers. It didn't just lead to Nexus Dynamics. It led directly to a private server registered to Rossi, which was physically located in an office leased by none other than the CEO of Nexus Dynamics, Jonathan Pike. As the evidence mounted, Harrison's confident smirk slowly evaporated, replaced by a pasty, slack-jawed expression of disbelief. He kept glancing from the documents to his lawyer, then back again, as if hoping one of them would declare it all a forgery. This wasn't part of his strategic pivot. This was a hostile takeover of his entire reality. "Mr. Cole," Judge Finch said, his voice heavy with authority, "were you aware that your new associate, Ms. Rossi, was systematically transferring your company's most sensitive intellectual property to your chief competitor?" Harrison swallowed his composure, shattering. "No, that's impossible. She loves me. She believes in my vision." "It appears Ms. Rossi's vision," the judge retorted dryly, "involved a significant transfer of your assets into her own." The final devastating blow came when Chloe called her last witness, a man named Frank Miller, a private investigator she had hired weeks ago, and told Miller, Chloe asked, "You were tasked with investigating the background of one Isabella Rossi. What did you find?" "Frank." A grizzled ex-cop spoke in a gravelly monotone. "Isabella Rossi isn't her real name. She was born Sofia Petrova in Bulgaria. She has a history. She did the exact same thing to a tech CEO in Germany 5 years ago. Ruined him. Got a multi-million-dollar settlement and disappeared. Before that, a hedge fund manager in London. She's a professional. She targets powerful, arrogant men, inflates their egos, and then bleeds them dry while selling their secrets to the highest bidder." A wave of sickness washed over Briona as she listened. It hadn't been about love or passion or even simple greed. It had been a job. Harrison wasn't the love of Isabella's life. He was her mark. Harrison looked utterly broken. The man who commanded boardrooms, who saw himself as a master of the universe, was exposed as a fool, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. His affair wasn't a passionate romance. It was a business transaction where he was the product being sold. Judge Finch granted their motion immediately. He placed Innovatech into temporary receivership to protect it from further damage and froze every known asset belonging to Harrison Cole and Isabella Rossi, aka Sofia Petrova. He also authorized a federal investigation into the corporate espionage. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Harrison was suspended as CEO of his own company. The board of directors, led by David Chen, began proceedings to oust him permanently. News of the scandal hit the financial press like a thunderclap, and Innovatech's stock plummeted. Briona left the courthouse, and for the first time in months, she could breathe. It wasn't about the money. It was about the truth. That evening, Harrison came to the condo. It was the first time he had sought her out. He looked like a ghost, pale, haggard, his expensive suit rumpled. "She's gone," he said, his voice hollow. "I went to the condo. It's empty. The accounts are cleared out. Everything's gone." Briona simply looked at him, holding Leo protectively in her arms. There was no triumph in her, only a profound sadness for the man he used to be and the man he had become. "I'm sorry, Briona," he whispered, his eyes finally meeting hers. They were filled with a desperate, pathetic plea. "I was a fool. I threw everything away. Please, can we fix this?" She looked from his broken face to the perfect sleeping face of her son, the son he had called a Cole, but treated like a footnote, the son he had abandoned in pursuit of a fantasy that turned out to be a corporate hit job. "There is nothing to fix, Harrison," she said, her voice soft but absolute. "You didn't just break our marriage. You incinerated it. The only thing left for us to do is sign the papers. But this time, they'll be on my terms." He stared at her, finally understanding. The power had shifted completely. He had lost everything: his company, his fortune, his reputation. And in the process, he had lost the one person who had ever truly believed in his vision, long before the millions and the magazine covers. He had lost his family, and that was a loss from which there was no recovery. The final meeting took place not in a confrontational courtroom, but in a quiet, soulless conference room on the 40th floor of a Century City skyscraper. The air was thick with the unspoken history of broken promises and shattered trust. 6 months had passed since the explosive hearing that had decapitated Harrison's empire. Today was the formal surrender. Harrison sat opposite Breonna, a ghost of the titan she had married. His bespoke suit, once a symbol of his power, now seemed to hang off his diminished frame. The confident predatory gleam in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted exhaustion. Beside him, William Sterling, the legal shark who had once sneered at Breonna, was subdued and meticulously polite. The power in the room no longer belonged to them. Chloe, radiating a calm and absolute authority, slid the final settlement agreement across the polished table. It was a masterpiece of legal fortification, a document designed not for revenge, but for permanent, unassailable security. "The terms are as we discussed," Chloe stated, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "Ms. Hayes will receive sole legal and physical custody of their son, Leo Michael Hayes. Mr. Cole is granted supervised visitation twice a month, contingent on the successful completion of a court-mandated therapy program. The Pacific Palisades property will be transferred unencumbered to Ms. Hayes. The financial settlement, as detailed in Exhibit C, provides a lump sum payment and establishes a trust for the child's future education and well-being. In return, Ms. Hayes waives all future claims to Mr. Cole's remaining assets or future earnings." Harrison didn't even read the document. He simply stared at Breonna, his eyes searching for something. Forgiveness, perhaps, or a flicker of the love he had so carelessly thrown away. He found neither. Breonna's expression was serene, composed, and as impenetrable as glass. She was no longer his emotional battleground. He picked up the pen, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly, and signed his name. The decisive, arrogant signature she once knew was now a shaky, hesitant scrawl. When it was her turn, Breonna's hand was steady. Her signature was a firm, clear declaration of her independence. With that final stroke of ink, 5 years of her life, a marriage she had believed in, was legally dissolved. There was no triumph in the moment, only a profound and quiet relief, the feeling of a heavy, suffocating weight finally being lifted from her chest. The first day she walked back into the Pacific Palisades mansion as its sole owner was the hardest. The house, once a symbol of her dreams, felt haunted. Every room held a memory, every surface a ghost of a life that had been a lie. She could almost smell the faint, lingering scent of his cologne in the office, see the phantom of Isabella's triumphant smile in the reflection of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her first act was not to unpack, but to cleanse. She threw open every window and door, letting the salty Pacific breeze rush through the cavernous rooms as if to physically blow away the residue of betrayal. The next day the contractors arrived. The transformation was radical and therapeutic. The dark, masculine mahogany office, the epicenter of her world's collapse, was the first to be gutted. It was reborn as Leo's playroom, the walls painted a cheerful, sunny yellow. An artist was hired to paint a whimsical mural of gentle sea creatures, otters holding hands and smiling whales across the largest wall. The cold, minimalist living room, with its untouchable white sofas designed for impressing guests, was remade into a warm, inviting family space. She chose a deep blue, comfortable sectional sofa, You could actually sink into soft rugs where a baby could crawl and low, sturdy tables. She filled the shelves not with abstract sculptures, but with framed photographs, Leo's toothless grin, Chloe holding him at the hospital pictures of her own parents. She was reclaiming the space, infusing it with authentic life and love. A year flew by in a beautiful blur of motherhood's milestones. It was a year of firsts. Leo's first crawl across the new soft rug. His first word, Mama. A sound that filled her with more joy than any diamond bracelet ever had. His first wobbly steps, taken on the lawn overlooking the ocean. The sleepless nights were no longer filled with anxiety and heartbreak, but with the quiet comfort of rocking a teething baby, his small, warm body curled trustingly against hers. She found a profound, grounding joy in the simple, messy realities of raising a child, the pureed carrots in her hair, the endless rereading of picture books, the sound of his uninhibited giggles echoing through the halls of the house she had truly made her own. Harrison's supervised visits were a sad recurring postscript to their story. He would arrive punctually, always dressed in clothes that were just a little too formal, a man visiting a foreign country whose customs he didn't understand. He brought extravagant gifts, a tiny drivable Lamborghini for a 1-year-old, a complex drone that was years beyond his comprehension, and seemed baffled when Leo was more fascinated by the cardboard box it came in. During one visit, Brianna watched from the kitchen as Harrison tried to engage with his son in the playroom. "Leo, look," he said, holding up a tablet. "This is a projection of Innovatech's Q4 growth from my last year as CEO. It's a perfect logarithmic curve." Leo, babbling happily, picked up a soft block and tried to put it in his mouth. Harrison sighed, the deep, weary sigh of a man who had lost the thread of his own life. He was a stranger to his own son, a visitor in a home that was no longer his, speaking a language of success and ambition that had no meaning here. Brianna felt a distant clinical pity for him. He was no longer the monster who had destroyed her life. He was just a broken man, paying the long, lonely price for his choices. Meanwhile, Sofia Petrova, the woman formerly known as Isabella Rossi, had her glamorous reign of destruction brought to an end. An Interpol notice caught up with her in Monaco, where she was already deeply enmeshed in the life of a Russian oligarch. Her extradition was swift. The subsequent trial was a media sensation, laying bare her years of sophisticated, predatory fraud. Harrison was compelled to testify a public humiliation that cemented his fall from grace. Brianna's design firm, which she relaunched as Hayes & Co., became her professional salvation. Her story, whispered through the elite circles of Los Angeles, gave her an unexpected allure. She was not just a designer. She was a survivor. Clients weren't just hiring her for her impeccable taste. They were drawn to her quiet strength. Her philosophy was simple. She created sanctuaries. She specialized in transforming houses into homes, spaces that nurtured the people within them. Her first major client was a recently divorced actress who wanted a home that was a fortress of peace for her and her children. The project was a resounding success, featured in Architectural Digest, and her career took flight. One warm evening, long after Leo was asleep, Brianna sat on the veranda overlooking the now peaceful ocean. The night was quiet, the only sound the gentle rhythm of the waves. She was scrolling through the news on her tablet when a small article caught her eye. Fallen tech mogul. Harrison Cole announces new life coaching venture, promises to teach secrets of resilient success. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. There was no anger, no bitterness, not even a flicker of schadenfreude. There was only the vast, peaceful emptiness of indifference. The man in that article was a character from a book she had read a long time ago, a story about someone else. His new venture, a desperate attempt to rebrand his monumental failure as a lesson in resilience, was so profoundly ironic, it was almost poetic. She put the tablet down and walked to Leo's room. He was asleep in his crib, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. One hand curled around a worn teddy bear. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating his perfect, peaceful face. In that moment, the full measure of her new reality settled over her. She had been betrayed in the most brutal way imaginable. She had lost a husband, a marriage, and the life she had thought was hers. But in the ashes of that life, she had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. She had built a new world from scratch, a world filled with authentic joy, purpose, and the overwhelming, unconditional love of her son. Harrison, with all his millions and his ambition, was the poorest man she knew. She, standing here in her sanctuary, with her thriving business and her beautiful boy, was the richest woman in the world. She had everything that truly mattered. She was finally, truly home. Briona's story is a harrowing reminder that the most devastating betrayals often come from the people we trust the most. It's a story about the illusion of a perfect life and the terrifying reality that can hide just beneath the surface. But more than that, it's a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unshakable strength of a mother's love. She didn't just survive, she rebuilt her world stronger and more beautiful than before on her own terms. What would you have done in Briona's position? Could you find the strength to fight back when your world imploded just days before giving birth? We all face battles in our lives, and stories like this remind us of the power we hold within ourselves. If this story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear a story of strength and survival. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories that will leave you speechless. Thank you for listening.